Billionaire's heart is touched when he sees a waitress with her special son. What he does changes everything. Before we start today's story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far our stories are reaching, and if you're a lover of heartfelt love stories, the kind that really hit deep, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That really helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring you even more emotional stories. The rain had just let up, but the streets of Austin still shimmered like broken mirrors under the yellow glow of the streetlights. On the damp sidewalk at the corner of 5th and Brazos Street, a little cafe tucked between a rundown flower shop and a 24-hour laundromat gave off the comforting smell of freshly ground coffee mixed with a faint scent of cinnamon that slipped through the cracks of the door. The sign hung crooked, almost unreadable, but inside there was warmth, from the oven, from life, from people trying to keep going. Grace Mitchell moved like a trained shadow, careful not to get in anyone's way. With a worn metal tray in her hands, she carried 2 steaming soup bowls, balancing between tightly packed tables and muffled conversations. Her face, modestly beautiful, was shaped by fine features and an expression of resilience. Her fair skin was slightly flushed from the warm air, and her green eyes looked like they were tired of waiting for miracles. Her light brown hair was pulled back hastily into a messy bun, with loose strands curling around the light sweat on her forehead. She wasn't there by choice, but by necessity. With every step, the clinking of silverware and the aroma of the dishes seemed like small reminders that it was still possible to keep things together, even if the outside world was falling apart. In the most sheltered corner of the cafe, between a bookshelf full of used books and a wall covered in faded children's drawings, Liam, her son, played with 2 scratched-up plastic toy cars. A blue blanket, frayed at the edges, was wrapped around his small shoulders like a tired superhero's cape. His eyes, a living gift from his mother, followed the toy cars like they were more than just toys. They were an escape company, protection. Grace never took her eyes off him, not even when delivering orders, not even when smiling out of obligation to a demanding customer. A soft hiccup, a strange movement, and she was right there. "It's okay, my love. This car still works. It just needs a little love," she whispered, kneeling beside him and adjusting the blanket gently. Liam looked at her and nodded. The car had lost a wheel, but she made him believe it still ran just as fast as before. He believed it, because she believed for him. The cafe door opened with the sound of an old bell, followed by a gust of cold wind that made the napkins on the counter flutter. Carter Hayes walked in, wearing a dark gray overcoat still quietly dripping. His Italian shoes glistened with rain, and his sharply tailored suit looked out of place in that space where luxury was the smell of fresh bread. He carried the posture of someone who'd mastered boardrooms and could silence rivals with just a look. He was on the phone, but his voice was low, tense. He ended the call with a simple, "We'll talk about it later." And then, like he was taking a deep breath for the first time all day, he looked around, searching for silence. Or maybe for a place where he could pretend the outside world didn't exist. And then he saw her, Grace, with her hands gently stroking her son's hair, her face lit up by a sad smile. The yellowish light made her seem almost ethereal. Carter stood still, watching. Something inside him, a crack that had been sealed shut for a long time, opened without warning. Maybe it was the contrast, her simple gesture against the harshness he'd been facing in his own life. Quiet betrayals in elegant meetings, expensive dinners that tasted like nothing, nights under silk covers but with a frozen chest. She didn't see him, not at that moment. She was too busy holding the entire world on her shoulders and smiling like it was light. He took a step forward, hypnotized. Grace stood up, only noticing his presence when they were face to face. "Are you going to order something, or would you rather just keep staring?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, her voice firm but not hostile. Carter blinked like he was snapping out of a daze. "Sorry, a coffee, black, strong." She nodded, turning without another word, her steps quick but still graceful. Behind the counter, as she prepared the drink, she bit the corner of her lip, an old habit from when she tried to hide the shaking in her hands. He kept watching her, now more closely. The discreet tattoo on her wrist, the worn-out silver ring, the shoes stained by routine. There was beauty in her exhaustion, strength in the details. Liam, curious, peeked at him from behind the shelf. Carter returned the look with a small smile. The boy shrank back a little, but didn't look away. The coffee arrived steaming. Carter received it with a slight nod. Grace didn't wait for a response. At the next table, an old radio played a country song at a nearly imperceptible volume. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping softly on the window pane, and Carter, sitting there with the cup in his hands, realized that this forgotten cafe in the heart of Austin hid something rarer than any $1,000,000 stock, a piece of truth. The next morning, the sky over Austin was covered with low clouds, as if the world were suspended between yesterday and today. The still wet asphalt reflected the headlights of the first cars crossing the avenues, and steam rose from the manholes like sighs from a tired city. Inside the same cafe, the clock read 8:20 a.m. Grace was already on her second round of brewed coffee and her third impatient customer. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep and her body ached, but her soul felt more restless than usual. Liam was still asleep, curled up on the corner couch, the same blue blanket covering his face. In that moment of reprieve, Grace used the time to organize the stack of dirty dishes on the counter when the door opened again. He walked in, Carter Hayes. This time he wasn't in a suit. He wore dark jeans, modest boots, and a dark leather jacket over a gray shirt. Even more casual, he still carried the posture of someone who always knew where he was stepping. But there was something different about him, a deeper silence in his gaze, as if he were there not out of habit but out of need. Grace pretended not to notice. He sat at the same table as the night before, near the fogged-up window. He didn't order anything. He just waited. When she finally approached with her notepad in hand, without even lifting her eyes, she asked, "Want the same as yesterday?" He hesitated for a second, then smiled. "If it's made by you, yes." She looked up dryly. "Here, coffee is what we have. Charm costs extra." She turned around before he could respond. Carter just let out a muffled laugh and looked out the window, watching the droplets begin to form again on the glass. The coffee arrived minutes later, served with the same precision as before. Hot, strong, straight, just like her. He drank slowly, and when he finished discreetly, he took the leather wallet from the pocket of his jacket. He placed a folded bill under the saucer. He didn't say anything. He just stood up, adjusted the sleeve of his coat, and walked to the door with the calmness of someone who knows they're being watched. Grace came over to clear the table, and when she lifted the saucer, she saw what he had left, $500. She froze. Her heart pounded in her chest like it was about to leap from her throat. For a moment, the world around her went silent. No clinking spoons, no humming from the old fridge, just that bill, wide, clean, defiant. And then she turned. She rushed out from behind the counter, ignoring the curious looks from the few customers. She walked straight to the door, which Carter was already pushing open to leave. "Hey," she called, louder than she intended. He stopped, turned slowly, surprised to see her there, so close, her eyes sparking like restrained lightning. "You think just because you wear a fancy suit or flash that practiced little smile, you can throw money around like it fixes everything," she said, holding the bill out firmly, as if it were burning in her hand. Carter was stunned. The silence between them filled with tension, with stories neither of them knew. "It's just gratitude for good service, nothing more," he he answered, serious, his tone unchanged. Grace took a step forward. "Then go buy gratitude somewhere else. Here we serve coffee, we don't sell dignity." The words landed like a hard slap in the air. Carter swallowed hard. His hand went to the back of his neck in an involuntary gesture of discomfort. He wanted to explain, wanted to say it wasn't condescension, that he didn't see her as charity. He wanted to say he'd thought about her all night, about the strength she carried, the tenderness that bloomed in the middle of chaos. But nothing came out, because in that moment any word would have been wrong. She stared at him for a few more seconds, waiting for him to say something that would undo the knot in her throat, but he said nothing. She turned, then walked back into the cafe with heavy steps. The bill, now crumpled in her hand, was shoved angrily into the pocket of her apron. Carter stood there in front of the still half-open door, holding his breath and nursing a bruised ego. But behind the embarrassment, something was blooming. He didn't know what it was, but it was real. A mix of frustration, admiration, and a new kind of discomfort. He couldn't get her out of his head. She, meanwhile, returned to the counter, but her blood was still boiling. She grabbed a cloth and started wiping the same table twice, 3 times. Her chest felt tight, not because of the money, but because of what she thought it meant. She didn't want pity. She wouldn't accept handouts, no matter how well-intentioned. In the corner, Liam was waking up slowly. He rubbed his eyes and looked around, still caught between dream and reality. When he saw his mother, he smiled. She smiled back, but her eyes were still misty. Her hand rested on the boy's hair like the night before, only now it trembled a little. Outside, Carter got into his car and looked at the cafe one last time through the rearview mirror. A car behind him honked, impatient, but he didn't drive off right away, because the seed had been planted, and something inside him, something he couldn't name, was already beginning to take root. The sound of the cafe door being locked echoed softly in the narrow back hallway. Grace turned the key twice and let out a long sigh, the kind that carries the weight of a full day of exhaustion, and swallowed silence. She grabbed Liam's small backpack and her own worn-out purse and climbed the steps of the building next door, where she rented a room on the 2nd floor that always smelled faintly of grease and hidden mold. The apartment was tiny, with peeling walls, worn carpet, and a window that barely opened. The one room served as living space, bedroom, and refuge. There was a mattress on the floor, covered in colorful sheets with cartoon characters, and beside it, a small nightstand marked with old cup stains and a faded photo in a cracked plastic frame. Grace sat at the edge of the mattress and looked at the picture carefully. Her fingers brushed across the glass, almost as if they could touch the past. The man in the photo had an easy smile, messy hair, and his arms around her, in a time when the world still felt full of promise. He wore a leather jacket, dirt-covered boots, and was holding Liam, still a baby. It was Noah, her husband, killed in a motorcycle accident just over 4 years ago. The police said he lost control on a curve. Grace knew deep down that he was running from a debt he never told anyone about. "You promised everything would be okay," she murmured, eyes misty but refusing to cry. "And I believed you." Liam was sleeping deeply beside her, his arms folded under his head. She pulled the blanket up over him and watched him for a few seconds, as if that were enough to keep the ghosts away. Then she leaned back against the cold wall, pulling an old coat over herself like a blanket. The night was especially quiet. Across town, at the top of a mirrored high-rise, Carter Hayes walked barefoot across the polished marble floor of his penthouse. The apartment was spacious, modern, almost entirely made of glass and concrete. The panoramic view of the city looked like a living painting, but to him it was just another reminder that, despite everything, he still felt alone. He approached a dark wood table where a leather folder rested, with a name embossed in subtle letters. He opened it carefully, as if the contents demanded reverence. Inside were neatly organized papers, stapled with color-coded tags. It was an adoption file. Carter flipped through the pages slowly. Mother's name, unknown. Father, absent. Given to the system at 2 months old. Grew up in foster homes with families that came and went like waves. No last name ever lasted until he chose one himself. Hayes, at 18, when he left the shelter and started college on a full scholarship he earned on his own. "You're going to have to be better than all of them if you want to survive, kid," the shelter director had said the day he left. Since then, Carter had spent his life trying to prove he was worthy. Worthy of a seat at the table. Worthy of the front row. Worthy of being remembered. But the higher he climbed, the emptier the view felt. He sat on the black leather couch, tossed the papers onto the coffee table, and ran his hands over his face. He felt a restlessness he couldn't name. The memory of the woman in the cafe wouldn't leave his mind. Her strength, her pride, the way she rejected him with the same intensity he had always longed to be accepted. He looked at the city again through the glass wall, the lights below flickering like broken stars. He thought about everything he had, and what he still lacked. "You never needed me to be whole," he whispered to no one, "but I never knew how to be whole without being needed." In the silence, their stories moved in parallel, not touching yet, but already tangled by an invisible thread. Two broken hearts, shaped by loss, by struggle, and by a longing they never dared speak aloud. She, trapped in a bleeding past. He trying to patch the cracks of the present with memories he never had. Outside, the rain began to fall again, gently, as if the sky were whispering old promises. And that night, without knowing it, they would both sleep restlessly. Something was calling them, something they couldn't see yet, but already felt. And fate was just beginning to tighten its knots. The early morning fell heavy over Austin, like a dark cloak full of omens. The sky looked swallowed by thick clouds, and the city, lit only by distant headlights and flickering signs, was wrapped in an electric tension that grew with each rumble of thunder. In Grace's small apartment, the walls trembled with every lightning strike, and the power flickered like an anxious heart. In the bedroom, Liam was having a meltdown, his eyes wide open, hands over his ears, body curled in a corner between the mattress and the wall. The lights flickered wildly, casting shadows like ghosts across the furniture. The building's generator had already given out, and the cold was starting to creep in through the poorly sealed window. Grace was on her knees in front of her son, breathing heavily, trying in vain to calm him with trembling hands and a voice that could barely come out. "Baby, look at me. Mommy's here. I'm here, sweetheart," she said between sobs, her voice cracking like glass. "It's going to pass, I swear. Just breathe with me. Like this." But Liam couldn't. His little body shook, his eyes locked on something invisible, lost in an inner world where fear ruled everything. He cried without sound, like even that had been taken by panic. The doorbell rang. Once, twice. Grace hesitated. Her heart was racing for a different reason now. Who would show up? At that hour of the night, in the middle of a storm. She got up with difficulty, wiped her eyes, and ran to the door. When she opened it, the cold wind hit her like a slap. Carter. He was completely soaked, hair stuck to his forehead, shirt clinging to his body, boots soaking the entryway rug. In one hand, he held a flashlight that lit up his own face, eyes filled with something that couldn't be named, but screamed urgency. I saw the lights go out, and I couldn't not come. Grace stood still for a second, her mouth slightly open, her chest rising and falling. He's in crisis. I don't know what else to do. Without saying a word, Carter stepped inside slowly. He didn't ask permission, but he didn't barge in either. He walked toward the bedroom with quiet steps, and when he reached the doorway, he crouched down. He turned off the flashlight, letting only the faint streetlight filter through the window. In the corner, Liam was still curled up. Carter didn't say a word. He just sat on the floor, a short distance from the boy, crossing his legs like he was ready to wait however long it would take. He looked at Grace, then at Liam, and spoke with a gentleness he'd never used before. "Can I just stay here with him?" The voice came out low, hoarse, as if every word carried a piece of the past he never had. Grace didn't answer. She just nodded, her lips pressed together to keep from falling apart right there. Carter then extended his hand, not to touch, just left it there between him and Liam, open, available, but asking for nothing. And then, as if something invisible broke between fear and gesture, Liam raised his eyes, slowly, hesitantly. His arms trembled, but his body began to move. First with a drag of his knees, then with a restrained push, he got closer. And what happened next, no one could explain with words. Liam rested his forehead on Carter's shoulder, then wrapped his thin arms around Carter's neck. A hug, a silent plea, a recognition without explanation. Carter closed his eyes, held the boy firmly, but gently, as if he'd waited his whole life for that touch. Grace, standing at the door, watched in silence. Tears streamed down her face. She wasn't crying from sadness. She cried from relief, from surprise, from a love so overwhelming it took her without warning. For the first time, someone besides her had reached Liam, and maybe was also reaching her. The storm outside roared, but inside, in the stuffy warmth of the small, dim room, there was a kind of peace that only the most improbable moments can offer. Liam's breathing began to slow. The once rigid body now melted into the embrace. Carter held him like someone learning to protect something fragile. Grace moved closer, sat beside them, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. In the dark, three wounded souls shared a small space, but for the first time it felt in a whole. 2 days had passed since the storm changed something invisible between them. Grace's apartment had returned to its usual rhythm, though inside she knew something had shifted. Liam was sleeping better. He didn't ask questions, but he spoke of Carter naturally, as if he'd always been part of his little world. And Grace, she tried in vain not to think about that silent hug. On the afternoon of a muggy Wednesday, the sound of hesitant footsteps climbed the narrow staircase of the old building. Grace, wearing an apron, was cleaning the kitchen when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she found Carter standing there, different from the man she'd seen the first time. No perfect suit this time. He wore a simple navy blue shirt and dark jeans. His eyes were downcast, showing a shyness that didn't match the successful executive he usually was. "Hey," he said, almost in a whisper, "can I come in for just a minute?" She hesitated out of instinct, but stepped aside. Carter walked slowly to the worn-out couch in the living room and sat at the edge, as if he didn't want to take up more space than necessary. Grace, still with slightly damp hands, crossed her arms, trying to hold on to a sense of control that was slipping away more and more. "Grace," he began, looking down at his hands, "I've been thinking about Liam, about that school for kids with special needs. I know the director. They have an amazing program, and an environment that could really help him grow." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at him with steady eyes, her face unreadable. He went on, "I know it's expensive. I know it's not easy, but he deserves that. And I'd like to help." Grace took a deep breath, walked over to the armchair and sat across from him. Silence stretched for several long seconds, dense, heavy. "You think just because you've got money you can fix everything with a check," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "I'm not for sale, Carter, and neither is my son." He seemed to shrink a bit under the weight of those words. He bit his lip and looked away. "I didn't mean it like that. It's not charity," he answered, with a tone more vulnerable than she expected. "It's an investment." She furrowed her brow. "Financial?" she replied, suspicious. "No." He lifted his face and finally met her eyes. "Human." Grace felt the ground shift slightly beneath her feet. like some part of her was being challenged to let down her guard. Her heart wanted to scream, to run. But at the same time, something in that offer touched a place she didn't dare admit, the desire to see Liam grow with more than she could give. After several long seconds, she gave a small, restrained nod. "All right, but on one condition." "Of course," Carter said, almost with relief. "No involvement." Her eyes were locked on his. "You help with the school. That's it. Nothing more." He took a deep breath. There was pain in his subtle smile, but also acceptance. "No involvement," he repeated. "Understood." But deep down, both of them knew that line had already been crossed, that Carter's gesture wasn't just for Liam, and Grace's acceptance wasn't just out of need. In the silences, in the unexpected hugs, in the gestures that spoke louder than promises, something invisible had already taken root. As he left, Carter looked over at Liam playing on the living room floor, his toy cars lined up with almost methodical precision. His eyes softened. "He's strong, like his mother," he said before the door slowly closed behind him. Grace stood there for a moment, eyes fixed on the wooden door. She knew that with that offer, a new phase was beginning. It wasn't about money. It was about trust, and trusting was, for her, the biggest risk of all. The end of fall in Austin brought a dry cold that cut the skin and lit a sense of nostalgia in the heart. Grace, for the first time in a long time, started to feel like there was room to dream again. Liam went to the special school with a new light in his eyes. Carter visited quietly, brought books, silly jokes, and a silent presence that calmed. But in every calm before a storm, there's a scent in the air that the experienced can recognize. In the luxurious condo where Carter lived, Vanessa Sterling's phone camera captured every perfectly made-up detail of her face. Her followers, more than 2 million, waited for gossip, drama, poison. "Guys, you won't believe this. Remember Carter Hayes?" "Yeah, that Carter. The quiet billionaire, the one who vanished from the social scene? Well, he's in love with some roadside waitress with a troubled kid. Can you believe that? Sounds like a cheap soap opera, right?" She laughed, faking surprise, but her eyes sparkled with revenge. She didn't mention names directly, but it only took seconds for social media to light up. A screenshot here, a nasty comment there, an old photo of Grace serving coffee, another holding Liam in her arms. In less than an hour, the video spread like wildfire. At the cafe, the place that had once been Grace's safe haven became a minefield. Customers whispered, pointed. The manager started receiving messages expressing concerns about the establishment's image, and the worst was yet to come. When she got home, Grace found Liam curled up in the corner of his room, toys scattered across the floor like they had been dropped in a hurry. The TV was on, playing a gossip show, Carter's name flashing in the caption, followed by the word scandal. "Liam," she said, kneeling down. He didn't answer. He just covered his ears with his hands and rocked slightly back and forth, like he did on his worst days. Her chest tightened. Anger and despair mixed together. She grabbed her phone and dialed Carter's number with trembling fingers. He answered in his usual calm voice. "Grace, No," she cut in, trying to hold back tears. "I warned you. I asked for one thing. Just one. I didn't know. I swear, this was Vanessa. I don't care about her," she interrupted, her voice now full of pain. "But my son, his name is everywhere. People who've never seen us, judging, calling him sick. A burden. Do you have any idea what that can do to him?" On the other end, Carter took a deep breath. "I'll fix this. I'll sue her, take the videos down, clean it all up. My son is not a PR weapon, Carter," she shouted. Then her voice broke, turning into a trembling whisper. "He doesn't deserve this weight, and neither do I." And without waiting for a reply, she hung up. That night was quiet. Even Liam didn't want to listen to music. Grace lay beside him, holding him tightly, as if she could protect him from a world she had never chosen to face. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling as silent tears fell, and one thought echoed in her mind. She had trusted, for the first time, and the world had shown its teeth. The soft sound of rain tapping against the window was the only soundtrack in Grace's apartment. Days had passed since the scandal, since Carter's silence, since she had pushed him away with words that were harsh but necessary. Austin felt colder, grayer. Routine had returned, but her soul had not. Grace packed Liam's lunch while he watched cartoons on the TV with little interest. The boy was quieter than usual. His little eyes, always attentive to details, now drifted across the colors on the screen without absorbing anything. Carter's absence was felt in every small action he used to share with enthusiasm. Liam stopped drawing, let the crayon roll off the table, and looked at his mother as if carrying a question he'd been holding inside for a long time. "Is he coming back?" he asked softly. Grace turned slowly, holding back the urge to cry just from hearing the question. She pretended to look for something in his backpack while trying to find the strength to answer. "The light man. Is he coming back?" Her chest tightened. "I don't know, my love," she replied in a trembling whisper. "Sometimes people need time." Liam nodded as if accepting that half-truth, but deep down she knew. He missed him. She did too. On the other side of the country, Carter watched the California ocean from a wooden balcony overlooking a cliff. He had rented a secluded cabin far from the noise, the business, the social media. He had temporarily stepped down as president of Hayes Tech. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to control anything. He read books about psychology, trauma, children on the autism spectrum. He revisited his own story in each chapter, facing memories he had locked away for years. His adoptive parents had been kind but distant. The real ones, he never even knew their names. He would close his eyes and remember little Liam holding his hand in that storm. The unexpected hug, the way he said light with eyes full of trust. But remembering Grace hurt the most. The look she gave him as she closed the door, the words said between pain and protection. He understood, but he also hurt. One night, Carter wrote a letter, 3 pages, telling everything. Who he was, what he felt, what he had discovered about himself since she and Liam entered his life. He didn't send it. He kept it in the pocket of the jacket he wore most often. On his phone screen, the photo of him with Grace and Liam at the park was still his wallpaper. He couldn't delete it. It was the only record of something that, for a few brief days, he believed could be a new beginning. Meanwhile, Grace swept the porch of the small apartment. The night was starry, cold, but calm. She sat in the rocking chair, wrapped in a thin blanket, staring at the sky as if waiting for an answer. And there, in the silence and longing, they both breathed the same absence. In the days that followed the silence, something inside Grace shifted. Sadness gave way to determination. Every time she saw Liam withdrawn, avoiding playing with other kids, curling into himself, she felt a fire growing inside her. She couldn't allow her son's name to be dragged through sick ambitions. She couldn't accept that the truth be buried for clicks and likes. She got up earlier than usual on a gray Saturday morning, served pancakes to Liam, and with a firm voice said, "Today, Mommy is starting a fight. For you. For us." She sat down with the old laptop on her lap, typing in keywords about defamation, image rights, and the protection of minors. At first, it all seemed like an incomprehensible legal maze. But she was stubborn. Every night after work was an improvised class. Every video she watched, every forum she read, a step on the ladder. She knocked on doors, wrote emails. Some ignored her. Others said it wasn't worth it. But she persisted. And when she least expected it, a local community justice group responded. Pro bono lawyers offered to represent her. The news spread through the neighborhood. The cafe customers, the same ones who once whispered, now offered words of support. A neighbor watched Liam during court hearings. A teacher wrote a letter of support. Grace, who had always walked invisible, was now seen with respect. The Travis County Courthouse in downtown Austin was packed on the day of the hearing. Cameras were not allowed. Vanessa Sterling, made up like she was the star of a reality show, sat next to a smug lawyer in a stiff suit with a bored expression. Grace entered with steady steps. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she saved for important interviews. Her hair was tied in a low bun, her gaze direct. There was no luxury, there was truth. At first, everything was tense. Vanessa's lawyer tried to paint Grace as an opportunist, someone trying to take advantage of someone else's fame. She just listened, steady, waiting for her turn. Then the door opened. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Carter walked in. He wore a dark brown blazer, no tie, a serious expression. He didn't take the witness stand. He asked permission to make a personal statement. The judge hesitated, then allowed it. He stood, looked at the jury, then at Grace. This woman doesn't need my help. She never did. And maybe that's why I admire her so much. She protects her son with a strength I've never seen before. When everyone doubted her, she stayed. When the internet burned her alive, she stayed. I saw Grace Mitchell up close, and I can say with absolute certainty what she has is integrity. He paused, his voice breaking for a second. And me, I needed her to understand what courage is, to learn that there are things money can't buy. Like a child's respect, like the truth. The silence after his words was more powerful than any argument. The jury looked at Grace with different eyes now. Hours later, the sentence was delivered. The court found Vanessa guilty of defamation and unlawful exposure of a minor. She was ordered to pay damages, issue a public retraction, and remove all content related to Grace and Liam from the internet. Outside the courthouse, Grace took a deep breath. She didn't smile, she just felt a relief that seemed to wash her soul clean. Carter approached cautiously, unsure if he'd be welcome. She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you for coming." "You did all of it on your own, Grace," he replied with a half-smile. "I just didn't want to stay silent again." She nodded, and for a brief moment their eyes met like something old and painful had dissolved in the air. And in the distance, Liam ran through the courthouse garden, free, light for the first time, unafraid to be seen. The victory in court brought more than justice, it brought peace. But there was a subtle emptiness, an absence that even the most beautiful words couldn't fill. Time passed, days turned into weeks, and then an invitation reached Grace, left quietly at the cafe by a volunteer from the organization that had helped her through the case. It was for a benefit event for neurodivergent children, organized by a local foundation. Grace hesitated, but something inside her whispered that maybe it was time to step out of the shadows again. Liam, upon hearing about a place with sensory toys, finger painting, and live music, gave a shy smile. It was rare. She couldn't bring herself to say no. That afternoon, Austin's sky was clear, tinted with a soft blue. The event took place in an open space, with white tents and colorful balloons dancing in the wind. Children ran, laughed, explored without judgment. Grace wore a simple floral dress, her hair loose over her shoulders. Liam wore a dinosaur t-shirt, his noise-canceling headphones protecting his sensitive ears. He held her hand tightly. Walking among those families made Grace feel like she was part of something, but it was the voice on the microphone that stopped her in her tracks. Empathy is when you understand without having to go through it yourself. When you choose to put yourself in someone else's shoes, even if the path is hard. It was Carter. He stood at the center of the main tent, surrounded by attentive adults, children playing in the background, and a local film crew covering the event. His light suit contrasted with the softness of his voice. But his eyes, they were looking for someone. "I've learned that empathy saves. It saves relationships, heals wounds, and rebuilds what pride once destroyed." Liam suddenly let go of his mother's hand. He ran. "Carter!" Carter turned around, and before he could react, he felt the soft impact of a small body against his own. Liam hugged him tightly, thin arms around his neck. "I missed you." Carter knelt down, looking him in the eyes. "I missed you too, champ, and your mom." Grace was slowly approaching, each step like diving into memories. Carter stood up slowly. His eyes met hers as if it were the first time, and at the same time as if they had always belonged there. "I never want to be apart from you two again," he said, his voice trembling with held-back emotion. Grace didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, and without another word, she stepped closer and kissed him. It wasn't a rushed or hesitant kiss. It was calm, full of history, of sorrows that had finally found peace, of silent promises. Around them, the sounds of the event seemed to fade. The laughter, the applause, even the wind seemed to pause for a moment. When their lips parted, she rested her forehead against his and whispered, "Now, we're three." Carter closed his eyes for a second, as if trying to lock that moment away somewhere sacred inside him. Liam, between them, held one of each of their hands, smiling with his eyes, even if he didn't fully understand the complexity around him. He simply felt it, and that was enough. Later, as the sun began to set, the three of them sat on the grass. Grace rested her head on Carter's shoulder, Liam lying in her lap, playing with a little dinosaur toy. The future was still uncertain, but there was something there that no scandal, no fear, no pride could erase. They were, finally, a family. The spring breeze brushed through the children's hair in the newly renovated park next to the recently opened Evelyn Foundation. It was a sunny Saturday, the kind that made the city of Austin look like a living painting. The cloudless blue sky reflected off the massive glass panels of the modern building, which looked more like a welcoming home than an institution. The front was covered in flowering vines and a mural painted by mothers and children from the community. Small hands had left their colorful marks there as a seal of belonging. Inside, walls in soft tones of green and sand gave a sense of calm. Children's books, adaptive toys, and phrases of empathy, written in both English and Spanish, welcomed every visitor. But what stood out the most was the golden name above the entrance: Evelyn Foundation, for a kinder tomorrow. Carter stood on the stage, set beneath a white fabric tent, with curtains dancing in the breeze. He wore a light suit, no tie. The businessman now looked like someone much more connected to real life. As he took the microphone for a second, his eyes searched for Grace among the crowd. "I grew up trying to prove my worth. I thought I had to conquer the world to feel deserving. But it was only when I met a hard-working mom and a boy with eyes that see into your soul that I understood what really matters." He paused, took a deep breath. The audience, attentive, felt the weight of every word. "This foundation carries the name of the woman who gave me life, Evelyn, but it also carries the spirit of every mother who fights every day without applause. Today, we're here for them, for you, and most of all, for our children." The applause came naturally, full of emotion. Some mothers cried silently, others smiled with teary eyes. Grace watched from the side, holding Liam's hand. She wore a navy blue dress made of light fabric, a braided leather belt at the waist, and her hair tied back in a simple bun. On her feet, flat sandals. In her eyes, pride and love. After the speech, Carter stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward her. There was tension in the first few steps, but she didn't pull away. "You honored your mother, and all of us," Grace said, her voice choked with emotion. Carter held her hand firm and gentle. "And you taught me how to love without being afraid of breaking." They looked at each other for a long moment. There was no audience in that instant, just two hearts finally speaking the same language. Meanwhile, Liam was running through the park, no longer wearing the headphones that used to shield him from the world. He jumped across sensory stones, played hide-and-seek with other kids, and laughed out loud, a sound that echoed like music in every corner of that place. A little boy fell, and before any adult could step in, Liam walked over, knelt down, and offered his hand. The girl accepted it and stood up with a shy smile. Grace, watching from afar, placed her hand over her heart. Carter, beside her, stood silently, eyes brimming with tears. "He's going to be better than all of us," he whispered. The sun, now lower on the horizon, painted the sky in orange and gold. The imaginary camera pulled back, capturing the children playing, the mothers chatting, and Hope breathing freely. The foundation became not just a building, but a symbol of new beginnings. And then the narrator's voice, deep, warm, and comforting, like a hug after a long journey. "In a world where everything has a price, there's still something that can't be bought. The strength of a heart touched by true love." The image faded into the sunset. Children's laughter continued to echo as the screen slowly went dark. And that was the story of Grace, Carter, and Liam. A journey of pain, courage, and love that proved even in the darkest storms, there is still hope. Now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Tell me in the comments from 0 to 10 how deeply it touched your heart. If you felt moved, don't forget to share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. And before you go, I've picked another story, even more intense, with twists that will stir your emotions from start to finish. It's worth checking out.